Have you ever felt like the other side in a negotiation is stonewalling you, or just saying no, or avoiding engaging the real issues? Then this video is for you, because today I'm going to share 4 strategies on how to break the stone wall and help you get to yes. And if you stick to the end, I'm going to share some personal stories on how I've been able to break stonewalling behavior, both at work and in dealing with some intractable vendors. Okay, strategy number 1, active listening. Active listening is the stealth weapon for stonewallers, especially asking lots and lots of open-ended questions. So what do I mean by open-ended questions here? I do not mean a question that is snarky or argumentative. I do not mean a question that can be answered with a yes or no. So a question like, can you do any better? Or, will you answer my question directly? I also don't mean a question that has an either or. Do you like vanilla ice cream or chocolate? Would you prefer A or B? And the reason why snarky questions, yes or no questions, and either or questions don't work is they tend to be dead ends. So a snarky or an argumentative question, instead of ending the stonewalling, actually helps fuel the stonewalling. It gives them more reasons to be non-responsive. So the trouble with a yes or no question is that it actually aids and abets the stonewalling. They could just give a one-word answer. Can you do any better? No. Would you be willing to do this? No. Do you prefer A or B? B. None of those things actually break the stonewalling behavior. So what does an open-ended question do? An open-ended question forces them to give more than one-word answers. It forces them to explain their thinking, to at least give you a few sentences. So what is an open-ended question? Well, something like, help me understand X, or say a little bit more about why you feel that way. Or, I understand your position, and at the same time, I'm curious how you arrived at it. Each of those things requires them to say a bit more. It's also the case that it may be that one of their interests is simply to feel heard. And so even if you understand what's important to them, even if you think you know everything they have to say, this active listening move actually makes the other side feel heard. Second, let's pretend you've been trying to do this active listening, this open-ended questions, and what you're getting in response is actually resistance, right? They say something like, I don't have to answer this question, or aren't you prepared, or I don't need to defend myself. When they do something like that, the second tactic here is to actually propose a solution or an outcome to them, and then ask them, what would be wrong with this scenario? Or what would be wrong with this outcome? This what would be wrong with that question is an extremely effective tactic. And here's why. Stonewallers and naysayers love to criticize. When you invite them to say what would be wrong with something, they'll go at it. I'll tell you what's wrong with it. And then they start talking. And the more talking they do, the better that is for you. The reason? The more talking they do, you're learning what their interests are. And that is your main goal here, because the more you know what their interests are, you're going to be able to craft responses to those concerns, and the harder it's going to be for them to continue to stonewall. So here's a common mistake I've seen negotiators make. They ask this wonderful question, what would be wrong with? And then the other side gives them 1 or 2 objections. So far, so good, right? But here's the mistake. They then interrupt and say, oh, but my outcome actually does that. And they start to defend it. Big mistake. Don't do that. Instead, say, that's so interesting. What else would be wrong with this? What are the other worries you have about it? Right? The more you do this, the more they list all of their concerns, the better it is for you. Once you have all those concerns, then try to craft an outcome that actually addresses those concerns. Now, if they're still saying no, push on them and say, help me understand how it doesn't meet this interest. They might go into another list. I'll tell you why A, B, C, D, and D. Try to meet those interests. Keep doing this iteratively over and over. At some point, of course, if they're still saying no, then you're learning something about them. And what you're learning is it really isn't about the interest. They're actually hiding something. And that's actually helpful to know. And that leads to my third piece of advice, which is when you're dealing with a stonewaller, when you're dealing with a naysayer, it's always helpful in a negotiation to improve your banta. So what is a banta? A banta is defined as your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And in a negotiation, I always need to think, if I don't reach an agreement with this party, what are the things that I can do that do not require an agreement with that party? And those things are our alternatives. The best of those alternatives, the one that I'm actually going to do if I don't reach an agreement, is my banta. And I always want my banta to be as good as possible. Some years ago, I was involved in a job negotiation, and the negotiation, let's just say, wasn't going well. There was a particular issue that was very important to me, and that, frankly, I felt like I was getting stonewalled on. I was constantly being told it wasn't possible. And I asked all these open-ended questions, I did a lot of active listening, and still nothing. And I just had a little bit of a sense that this was genuine stonewalling and not that this person couldn't actually meet my interest or concern. So ultimately, what I had to do was go off and get a competing offer. In other words, I improved my banta. And then in the negotiation, I had to announce that I actually regrettably was planning on moving to my banta. And as soon as I did that, suddenly the issues were resolved and I got what I needed. Now, let me be clear here, right? I did not do this as a threat or as a fake tactic. I had decided in my own assessment of my interests that if I couldn't get this thing I needed in the negotiation, that I genuinely was going to go to my banta because I had decided that that best alternative was better than reaching the agreement that was being offered to me. But luckily, the strategy worked and the stonewalling ended. Last step here is if you continue to receive ongoing stonewalling, you may need to consider changing the players. So what do I mean by that? I mean that somehow I don't want to reward this stonewalling behavior. So I need to think about, is there a client I can bring in, or a supervisor, or maybe a third-party neutral? But somehow I don't want to reward this behavior, which means bringing in someone else to break this bad dynamic. Now, this is the last of my 4 steps for a reason. It is the most risky. I don't want to start there immediately, because if I start there immediately, I'm basically saying to the person, you are a problem. And even if that is true, that's not the place I want to start. I want to try the active listening first. I want to try understanding their interests by giving them a proposal and seeing what's wrong with it. I want to try by improving my banta. But if none of that works, then I might want to change the players. And even the way I do that really matters. I don't want to suggest to this person that they are the problem. Instead, I want to say something like, I'm incredibly thankful for all the help you've been able to give me. And I appreciate that you are stuck here. What I'd be incredibly grateful for is if you could help me understand who in your organization I might be able to talk to, who might be able to move some of these boulders. So in other words, even in this moment, I'm still being thankful and appreciative of this person. I'm not saying they're the problem. They can actually help me get to people who can actually be useful. So I have found this to be particularly helpful in situations where I'm dealing with a vendor, let's say a cable company or a retailer, and I'm getting a lot of, I can't do that, or this is the limits of my authority, or this is our policy, right? All of these are versions of stonewalling. And instead of fighting them or wearing them down or getting angry at them, I basically thank them for the ways in which they've been helpful and ask them if they can continue to help me by putting me in touch with someone else in their organization who may have some more authority or more insight on the matter. So, to summarize, when dealing with stonewalling behavior, follow these 4 steps. First, active listening with lots and lots of open-ended questions. Second, when that doesn't work, propose some kind of a solution or outcome and ask them to explain to you what is wrong with that, and then let them go on and on so you learn what their interests are. Third, do all you can to improve your BATNA. And fourth, when none of the above work, consider changing the players. Keep watching now to learn how to negotiate when the other side has more power. And before you leave, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, ring the bell, and hit like to this video. Thanks for watching. Okay, don't stonewall me, keep watching.